The Carter's house on Oak River Avenue in Portland, Oregon, had always been the envy of their neighbors. The three-story Victorian mansion with its perfectly manicured lawn and blooming hydrangeas seemed like the embodiment of the American dream. That's how 37-year-old Melissa Carter saw it when she convinced her husband Daniel to buy the house 5 years ago, despite its inflated price. Melissa always got what she wanted, says Jennifer Morris, Melissa's best friend since college, sitting in the spacious living room of the investigation department. She was an amazing developer, able to see potential and value in things that others considered hopeless, including people. Melissa Carter built an impressive career at Portland Prime Properties, rising from a simple real estate agent to one of the region's leading developers. She specialized in renovating historic buildings for modern use while preserving their authentic character. Over the past 3 years, she has overseen projects worth more than $60 million and earned a reputation as the gentrification wizard, a nickname she wore with pride despite the controversy surrounding the phenomenon. "We had an unwritten rule not to discuss her work at our dinner parties," recalls Mark Jenkins, a neighbor of the Carters and a professor of sociology at Portland University. "Once, I mentioned the displacement of low-income families from the areas where she was implementing projects, and Daniel immediately changed the subject. That was the only time I saw him stand up for Melissa." In contrast to his wife's professional successes, 40-year-old Daniel Carter's career at Oregon Financial Group had not been going well in recent years. Starting out as a promising financial analyst, he had stalled at the position of senior manager, while his younger colleagues had moved up the ladder. "Daniel was methodical, but not innovative," comments Richard Palmer, his immediate supervisor. "He performed his assigned tasks flawlessly, but never went beyond his job description. In our field, that limits growth. For the past 2 years, he seemed distant, as if his thoughts were somewhere far from work." Colleagues noted Daniel's growing aloofness, especially when it came to his personal life. He rarely participated in corporate events and never invited co-workers to his home. The only thing he has been willing to share lately is the news of Melissa's pregnancy, which came after several years of unsuccessful attempts. "When Melissa finally got pregnant, Daniel seemed to be transformed," says Jennifer Morris. "He started controlling literally everything: her diet, physical activity, social circle. Under the pretext of caring, he effectively isolated her from many of her friends. I remained in their lives only because I had known Melissa longer than he had." According to Jennifer, problems had been brewing in the Carters' marriage for a long time, masked by outward prosperity. Melissa was a workaholic, often staying late and spending her weekends at work sites. Daniel, on the other hand, preferred to spend his evenings alone in his home office, reading historical novels and watching documentaries about World War II. "They lived parallel lives in the same house," says Jennifer. "The pregnancy was supposed to bring them closer together, but instead, it exposed old problems." One of those problems was Daniel's categorical alienation from his own family. In 5 years of marriage, Melissa had never met his parents, who lived in Seattle, just 3 hours away. An even more mysterious figure was Daniel's brother Thomas, whom he refused to talk about, cutting off any conversation on the subject with a sharp, "We don't talk." "Once, I accidentally mentioned Thomas at dinner," recalls Jennifer. Daniel turned pale, clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white, and left the table. Melissa later apologized for his behavior and whispered that something serious had happened between the brothers many years ago, but even she didn't know the details. As her pregnancy progressed, Melissa increasingly talked about the need to restore family ties. "A child needs grandparents, uncles, aunts, a complete family," Jennifer quotes her as saying. She said that the birth of a child was the perfect opportunity for reconciliation. At the office, Melissa remained the same: confident, decisive, and ambitious. She refused to take maternity leave until the last trimester and continued to oversee the renovation of a historic former textile factory in downtown Portland. The $15 million project was to be the crown jewel of her portfolio and possibly secure her a partnership in the company. "Melissa treated this project like her baby," says Alex Chen, her assistant. She would arrive at the site at 7 in the morning, hold meetings with contractors, and personally inspect every element of the renovation. Even when she started experiencing morning sickness, she just kept a bag nearby and continued working. I've never seen such dedication in any other manager. At home, Melissa faced growing misunderstanding. Daniel insisted that she reduce her working hours, get more rest, and focus on preparing for motherhood. Their arguments on this subject became more and more intense. Twice, I found Melissa in tears after another conversation with her husband, Jennifer recalls. She was never a crier, but her hormones made her more emotional, and Daniel seemed to use that to manipulate her. He constantly reminded her that her job and stress could harm the baby. A month before the tragedy, Melissa finally agreed to reduce her time at the office and started working from home 3 days a week. This coincided with a period when she was actively preparing the nursery and planning a gender reveal party. Melissa was transformed when she started decorating the nursery, says Emily Williams, the interior designer hired for the project. She knew exactly what she wanted: neutral colors, minimalist furniture, lots of natural light. Daniel kept his distance, but insisted on installing an advanced video surveillance system in the room. It seemed excessive to me for a newborn, but Melissa said it helped him feel in control of the situation. As the party date approached, Melissa became increasingly pensive and quiet. A week before the event, she asked Jennifer to help her sort through old things in the attic of their house, explaining that she wanted to make room for baby supplies. "We found a box of Daniel's family photos in the attic," Jennifer recalls. Melissa was amazed to find so many pictures of Thomas in there. In one of the photos, the brothers were standing arm in arm, about 20 years old. They looked strikingly alike. Melissa stared at the photo for a long time, then said something strange. "Whatever happened between them, blood is always blood. Our child deserves to know his whole family." That evening, when Daniel returned from work, Melissa showed him the photos she had found. According to the housekeeper, Rosa Martinez, who was in the house at the time, the conversation quickly escalated into a heated argument. "Senor Daniel was shouting so loudly that I could hear him through 2 closed doors," Rosa recounts. "He demanded that Senora Melissa never mention his brother's name again and not pry into his past. I had been working for them for 3 years and had never seen him so enraged. Senora was crying, but she didn't back down. She said that their child had a right to know the truth about his family." After this argument, Daniel spent the night in the guest bedroom. The next morning, the couple acted as if nothing had happened, but the tension between them was palpable. Melissa continued preparing for the party, while Daniel threw himself into his work, staying late at the office. 3 days before the party, Melissa visited her gynecologist, Dr. Susan Clark, for a routine checkup. According to Dr. Clark, Melissa was in excellent physical condition, but she seemed anxious and admitted that she was under a lot of emotional stress due to problems in her marriage. "She asked me if stress could harm the baby," Dr. Clark recalls. "I assured her that moderate stress is a normal part of life, but recommended relaxation techniques and offered the contact information for a family psychologist. Melissa thanked me for the advice, but said that Daniel would never agree to therapy. She was confident that the birth of their child would solve their problems on its own." The day before the party, Melissa had lunch with Jennifer at a small cafe near her office. She was unusually lively and excited. "She told me she was going to do something special at the party," Jennifer recalls. "When I asked what it was, she smiled mysteriously and replied, 'I've found a way to heal old wounds. It will be a new beginning for the whole family.' I thought she might have invited Daniel's parents without his knowledge, but now I realize it was something more significant. No one could have imagined that this party, intended to be a celebration of new life, would turn into a tragedy that would shock all of Portland and mark the beginning of one of the most difficult investigations of Detective Sarah Rodriguez's career. I never believed in happy families," says Detective Sarah Rodriguez, sitting in her office filled with files of unsolved cases. "In 20 years on the homicide squad, I've seen enough to know that every family has skeletons in the closet. The Carters were no exception. Behind the facade of a perfect marriage lay a dark history with roots stretching far back into the past. After discovering the box of photographs, Melissa Carter began a quiet investigation into her husband's family history. According to the call log provided by the telephone company, she had called Daniel's parents in Seattle 3 times in the 2 weeks before the tragedy. All 3 conversations were brief, lasting less than 5 minutes each. Melissa told me about these calls, recalls Jennifer Morris. Daniel's parents were polite but cold. They congratulated her on her pregnancy, but declined the invitation to the gender reveal party. When Melissa mentioned Thomas, Mrs. Carter simply hung up the phone. Melissa's interest in her husband's mysterious brother only grew. According to Alex Chen, her assistant, she began spending part of her workday on the computer, which was unusual for her. The company's system log showed that during those days, Melissa was searching for information about Thomas Carter on social media and professional databases. One day, I walked into her office without knocking and saw her quickly close a browser tab, Alex says. For a moment, I noticed some kind of medical document. When I asked if everything was okay with the baby, she assured me too quickly that the baby was fine and changed the subject to work matters. 10 days before the tragic party, Melissa made an unannounced trip to Seattle. Surveillance footage from the Portland Prime Properties office shows that she left the building at 11:43 a.m. on Tuesday, telling colleagues that she was going to lunch with a client. However, GPS data from her car obtained during the investigation shows that she instead headed north on Interstate 5. She called me from her car that day, Jennifer recalls. Her voice was agitated. She said, "I'm going to Seattle. I need to talk to Daniel's parents in person. Something doesn't add up with this Thomas story." I asked if Daniel knew about it. She replied, "Of course not. He would never allow it." Melissa's visit to Seattle lasted only a few hours. According to her credit card, at 4:20 p.m., she paid for coffee at Pine Street Espresso, located 2 blocks from Daniel's parents' house. At 4:52 p.m., she sent Jennifer a text message. They refused to talk to me. A neighbor said she saw them at home, but they didn't open the door. Something is very strange here. On her way back to Portland, Melissa made one more stop. Records show that she visited the Seattle Public Archives, where she spent nearly an hour. Archives employee Margaret Hunter recalls the encounter. This pregnant woman seemed very determined. She was looking for information about the Carter family and was particularly interested in local newspaper articles from 10 years ago. I helped her find several articles. She made copies and looked shaken as she read one of them. She even sat down, as if she felt dizzy. During the investigation, Detective Rodriguez discovered a scanned newspaper clipping from the Seattle Times dated 2015 on Melissa's personal laptop. The article was about a local university student who was hospitalized in critical condition after an incident on campus. Although the article did not mention any names, the clipping was saved in a folder labeled Thomas. That evening, Melissa returned home late, around 11 p.m. Surveillance camera footage from the Carters' front door shows Daniel waiting for her in the living room. Judging by the recording, the conversation was tense, comments Detective Rodriguez. Although the audio was not recorded, the body language speaks volumes. Daniel was clearly angry, gesturing and pointing at his watch. Melissa first made excuses, then began to explain something emotionally. At one point, she took some papers out of her bag, probably the very copies from the archive. The next morning, the Carters' neighbor, Eleanor Green, returning from her morning jog, became an unwitting witness to an unusual scene. Daniel was standing by the trash can on the driveway, burning some papers in a metal bucket. "It looked strange," Mrs. Green said. "He was dressed in a suit, ready to go to work, but he was methodically burning the documents page by page. When he noticed me, he quickly closed the lid on the bucket and said something like, 'I'm getting rid of old tax returns.' But I clearly saw photographs among the papers." In the days that followed, Melissa became more cautious, but she didn't give up her search. Her browser history shows that she searched for information about admission to the University of Washington in 2014-2015, as well as court cases related to incidents on campus. "She called me almost every night that week," Jennifer says. In our last conversation, 3 days before the party, she said she had found Thomas. "He's alive, Jen," she said, "and I have his contact information. I don't know what happened between them, but it seems like it was something terrible. Daniel will never forgive me if he finds out, but I have to try to fix this for our child." Mobile phone records confirm that Melissa made a 27-minute call that same evening to a number registered to Thomas Carter. The content of the conversation remains unknown, but immediately afterwards, she sent a text message to the same number. "Thank you for understanding. I'm sure it will be right for everyone. I'll send the party details tomorrow." At this time, Daniel Carter was showing signs of growing anxiety. His immediate supervisor, Richard Palmer, recalls, "Daniel was always focused and methodical in his work, but during those days he made mistakes that were unusual for him. He missed 2 important client meetings. In a financial analysis for Trenton Corporation, he mixed up the quarterly figures, which could have had serious consequences for the company. When I pointed out the mistake, he reacted inappropriately, almost shouting that everyone was against him." Colleagues noticed that Daniel often locked himself in his office and talked on the phone for long periods of time in a hushed voice. Call records show that he made several calls to Seattle, to his parents, and to several unidentified numbers. 2 days before the party, an incident occurred that particularly alarmed Jennifer Morris. She had come to the Carters' house to help Melissa with the final preparations. When she entered the house, she heard loud voices coming from Daniel's office. "The door was ajar, and I couldn't help but overhear part of the conversation," Jennifer says. "Daniel was saying, 'He has no right to show up at my house after what he did. If you invited him, I swear, Melissa, this will be the last party you ever throw in this house.'" Melissa tried to calm him down, saying something about forgiveness and family values. Then she noticed me and quickly closed the door. Later, when Daniel left the house, Melissa tried to explain the situation, but remained evasive. She said she wanted to do something special for the party, Jennifer recalls. When I asked if it had anything to do with Thomas, she looked down and said, "Daniel needs to let go of the past. What happened was a tragedy, but not a crime. A child needs a whole family, not half." She looked determined, but scared. I suggested postponing the idea, but she refused. That same evening, according to GPS data, Daniel Carter made an unusual trip. Instead of returning home from work, he drove to an industrial area of Portland, where he spent about an hour at a storage facility owned by North Pacific Storage. Records show that Daniel had rented a small storage unit there since 2015, a fact that Melissa, according to Jennifer, was unaware of. The morning after this trip, Daniel seemed calmer. According to housekeeper Rosa Martinez, he even made Melissa breakfast and was unusually attentive. "Senor Daniel made Senora an omelet with vegetables and fresh juice," Rosa said. "He smiled and talked about the party, asking if everything was ready. When the Senora mentioned that she was expecting a special cake to be delivered, he didn't even ask for details, although he usually controlled all expenses." That day, Melissa went to her last appointment with her gynecologist before the party. Dr. Susan Clark notes that Melissa felt fine physically, but was emotionally tense. She spoke incoherently, jumping from topic to topic, Dr. Clark recalls. She mentioned that she had finally found a way to make their family whole. When I asked for more details, she said that she was going to announce not only the sex of the baby, but also its name, in honor of Daniel's brother. According to her, this was supposed to break the ice and start the healing process. She was sure she was doing the right thing. After the appointment, Melissa met Jennifer at a cafe. She seemed excited and nervous at the same time. "She showed me the ultrasound photo," Jennifer recounts. "It was a boy, although it was supposed to remain a secret until the party. Melissa said she had already chosen a name, Thomas. Can you imagine?" she said. "The baby looks so much like Daniel's brother in the photos. It's fate." I asked if Daniel knew about her plans, and she admitted that she wanted to make it a surprise at the party. I tried to talk her out of it, warning her that such personal decisions were better discussed in private, but she was adamant. He won't be able to make a scene in public, she said. And then, when everyone sees how wonderful it is, he'll come around. Jennifer's anxiety grew. That same evening, she decided to talk to Daniel directly, without revealing Melissa's plans. She called him under the pretext of discussing the final details of the party. He sounded strangely calm, Jennifer recalls. He said he completely trusted Melissa and me to organize everything, and that he would accept whatever decision his wife made. Melissa deserves the perfect party, he said. I want this day to be special for all of us. There was something unnatural in his voice, as if he were reading from a script. After the conversation, Jennifer sent Melissa a text message expressing her concern. I spoke with Dee. Something is wrong. Maybe we should postpone the announcement. Let's discuss it in the morning. Melissa's reply came an hour later. Everything will be fine. I found something that will change his attitude. He will understand why it's so important. Trust me. That was the last message Jennifer received from her friend on the eve of the party that became a turning point in the Carter family's life. On a cloudless April morning, Melissa Carter sat in the waiting room of Portland Maternity Clinic, unconsciously stroking her belly, already noticeably rounded in her 5th month of pregnancy. Today's ultrasound was finally going to reveal the secret that she and Daniel had decided to keep until the party: the sex of their future child. Melissa looked both excited and peaceful, recalls nurse Janet King. When Dr. Clark told her she was having a boy, she burst into tears of joy. She kept repeating, I knew it. I felt it all along. Then she asked for a printout of the ultrasound and stared at it for a long time, as if she were looking for something. After leaving the doctor's office, Melissa immediately called her friend Jennifer, but not her husband. She was euphoric, Jennifer says. It's a boy, Jen. I'm so happy. It's fate, you know? Now everything is falling into place. When I asked why she wasn't calling Daniel, Melissa replied with a strange phrase. He'll have his time for the news. I want him to hear it along with the name. Melissa did not go to the office that day, but instead went to the Portland Public Library. According to her library system searches, she studied books on the meaning of names and family naming traditions. According to surveillance camera footage, she also visited the periodicals section, where she browsed through archives of local newspapers from 2015, a period when, as she had previously discovered, an incident involving Thomas Carter had occurred in Seattle. When she got home, Melissa spent several hours in her study with her laptop. Her search history for that day included queries such as meaning of the name Thomas, uncle's inheritance rights, how to overcome family trauma, and reconciliation of brothers in biblical stories. At 6:30 p.m., when Daniel was due to return from work, Melissa prepared a special dinner: steaks with red wine, her husband's favorite dish, which he had not eaten since the beginning of her pregnancy. According to housekeeper Rosa Martinez, Melissa seemed nervous, checked the table setting several times, and even lit candles, an unusual detail for a weekday evening. The señora tried very hard, Rosa recalls. She even put on a nice dress and makeup, although she usually wore simple clothes at home. When Señor Daniel called and said he would be late from work, I could see how upset she was. Daniel returned home at almost 11 p.m. By that time, dinner had long since cooled, and Melissa was waiting for him in the living room, leafing through a catalog of children's furniture. The home security camera recorded their brief conversation. You missed dinner, Melissa said, without looking up from the catalog. Sorry, I was swamped at work. You know how it is, Daniel replied, taking off his coat. His movements were unnaturally slow, as if he were exhausted or under the influence of alcohol. I went to the doctor today. Ultrasound, Melissa continued. Daniel froze. And? The results will be at the party, just like we planned. She finally looked at him. If you even show up. Don't start, Mel. Of course I'll come. It's our baby. He moved closer and tried to put his hand on her shoulder, but she pulled away. Yes, ours. And your family's too. Her voice was quiet, but firm. Daniel sighed. We've already discussed this. The child will have a family. We are his family. An incomplete one, Melissa objected. I invited your parents to the party. Daniel's face contorted, and he clenched his fists. What have you done? They won't come, don't worry, Melissa quickly added. But I had to try. Daniel, what really happened to Thomas? What happened at the university? The camera captured Daniel turning abruptly and heading for the stairs. I'm not going to discuss it, especially not now that you're pregnant. You need peace and quiet, not old drama. Daniel, I have a right to know. Melissa followed him. I found articles about the incident. They mentioned a fight, an injury, but no names. Enough! His shout was so loud that the camera captured Rosa, who was in the kitchen at the time, flinching. I won't let you dig into my past. It's my life, my family, and I decide who I let into it. With that, he went upstairs, leaving Melissa standing at the foot of the stairs. The recording shows that she stood there for a long time, then slowly returned to the living room, where she spent another 2 hours talking on the phone in a hushed voice. The next morning, a tense truce was established between the spouses. Daniel left for work early without eating breakfast. Melissa, contrary to her doctor's advice to get more rest, threw herself into preparing for the party with redoubled energy. She was like a woman possessed, recalls Jennifer, who came to help with the decorations. Everything had to be perfect. Blue and pink balloons, a special cake with a filling the color of the baby's gender, gift bags for the guests. But what worried her most was a letter that she kept checking in her purse. By noon, suppliers began arriving at the house. Florists with arrangements of blue and pink flowers, a catering service, and photo booth installers. Melissa personally supervised every detail, periodically distracted by phone calls, which she preferred to make outside in the garden, out of reach of the home's surveillance cameras. After one such call, Jennifer noticed that her friend seemed particularly agitated. Her hands were shaking, Jennifer recounts. I asked if everything was okay, and she replied, he agreed to come. Jen Thomas will be here tomorrow. I was shocked and started to talk her out of it, reminding her of Daniel's reaction, but Melissa was adamant. I have something that will change everything, she said. A document proving that Daniel has been wrong all these years. What exactly Melissa had discovered remained a secret even to Jennifer. However, during the investigation, Detective Rodriguez found correspondence in Melissa's email with the law firm Benson & Partners in Seattle. One of the emails mentioned a request for a copy of the medical report in case number 457-2015. Attached to the email was a scan of an official document with the seal of the University of Washington Hospital, but the contents of the file were encrypted, and investigators were unable to access it. In the afternoon, Melissa unexpectedly left the house for 2 hours, telling Jennifer that she needed to pick up the finishing touches for the party. Surveillance footage from the show that she visited the Silver Creek jewelry store, where she purchased an engraved men's bracelet for $350. Saleswoman Amanda Perry recalls that Melissa ordered the engraving in advance and seemed very pleased with the result. It was a silver chain bracelet with a small plate, Amanda says. The plate was engraved with Thomas and a date. The woman said it was a gift for her husband's brother, whom they hadn't seen in a long time. She mentioned that it was a reconciliation gift. When she got home, Melissa hid the box with the bracelet in her office, in a desk drawer under a stack of papers. She didn't know that Daniel, who had come home from work earlier than usual and found no one at home except the workers, had taken advantage of her absence to look around her office. The camera in the hallway recorded Daniel spending almost 20 minutes in Melissa's office, after which he came out looking deeply shaken. He was holding a piece of paper, which he immediately took to his office and locked away. When Melissa returned, Daniel greeted her with unusual warmth. He helped carry the groceries, asked about the party preparations, and even suggested inviting additional guests. His sudden enthusiasm made me wary, Jennifer recalls. He had never been enthusiastic about social events, and now he was suddenly suggesting ideas for games and prizes. Melissa was also surprised, but delighted. She whispered to me, "See, he's starting to thaw. Tomorrow will be perfect." In the evening, when all the helpers and suppliers had left, the Carters were alone. According to their neighbor Eleanor Green, she went out to walk her dog around 9 p.m. and noticed that there was a tense conversation going on in the Carters' house. "I didn't want to eavesdrop, but the voices were very loud," Mrs. Green said, "especially Daniel's voice. I heard him yelling something like, 'You have no right to interfere. You don't know what I've been through.' Then there was the sound of breaking glass. I was about to call the police, but then everything went quiet. The Carters' front door security camera recorded Daniel running out of the house at 9:17 p.m., getting into his car and driving away. He didn't return until 3 hours later. City surveillance camera footage shows that he spent the entire time sitting in his car at the Mount Tabor Park overlook, a spot known for its panoramic view of Portland. During this time, Melissa made a series of phone calls. First, she called Jennifer, her voice sounding agitated but determined. She said Daniel had discovered a medical report she had received from the university hospital, Jennifer recalls. The document concerned the incident with Thomas. According to Melissa, Daniel flew into a rage, accusing her of betrayal and meddling in something she didn't understand. But she was sure she was doing the right thing. "This report proves that things weren't the way Daniel thinks they were," she said. "Tomorrow, when Thomas comes, the truth will finally come out." Melissa then called a number identified by investigators as belonging to Thomas Carter. The conversation was brief, less than a minute. Immediately after, she sent a text message. "Everything is still on. He knows, but that's even better. Tomorrow at 4, don't be late." Melissa's last call was to her parents, who lived in Chicago. Her mother, Grace Foster, recalls the conversation with tears in her eyes. Melissa sounded strangely detached, almost subdued. She talked about the baby, how happy she was that it was going to be a boy. She said she had a feeling that he would be special, that he would make up for past mistakes. I asked if everything was okay with Daniel, and she replied, "After tomorrow, everything will change, Mom. Either we'll become a real family, or..." She didn't finish the sentence. I asked her to explain, but she changed the subject. That was the last time I heard my daughter's voice. When Daniel returned home, the house was dark. Melissa was already asleep, or pretending to be asleep, in their bedroom. A camera in the hallway recorded Daniel standing at the doorway for a long time, watching his wife, and then heading to his study, where he spent the rest of the night. Computer experts who examined his laptop found that he had visited several websites that night related to paternity rights, child custody, and divorce in Oregon. He also searched for information about Thomas Carter, checking his social media profiles and looking at photos. At 5:30 a.m., a few hours before the party, Daniel did something else that's hard to explain. He left the house, got in his car, and drove to the Food Line supermarket, which opened at 6 a.m. The store's surveillance cameras show that he purchased only one item, a Chef Master stainless steel steak knife, which he paid for in cash. Returning home, Daniel put his purchase in the trunk of his car and then entered the house, where Melissa was already awake, preparing for the most important day of their lives, a day that was supposed to bring reconciliation, but instead turned into a tragedy that shook the entire city of Portland. The day of the party was clear and warm, as if nature itself was blessing the celebration of new life in the Carter family. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, their yard had been transformed. Blue and pink balloons, garlands, tables with refreshments, a bar with non-alcoholic cocktails, and of course, the main decorative element, a large cake with the inscription, "He or She," the filling of which was supposed to reveal the sex of the baby. Melissa was in a fever all morning, recalls Jennifer Morris. She kept checking the time, rearranging the decorations, swapping the cards with the guests' names. I've never seen her so nervous. In contrast to his wife, Daniel radiated a strange calm. He methodically carried out all of Melissa's instructions. He arranged the chairs, helped the catering service, and even joked with the workers who were setting up the music equipment. This change in his behavior did not escape Jennifer's attention. There was something unnatural about him, she says. It was as if he was playing the role of the perfect husband. His eyes remained cold and distant, even when he smiled. By 4 o'clock, the yard began to fill with guests. Melissa's colleagues from Portland Prime Properties, several employees from Daniel's company, neighbors, and close friends of the couple. About 30 people in all. Melissa greeted guests in a blue dress that accentuated her rounded belly, and with a broad smile that, according to Jennifer, didn't reach her eyes. She kept glancing at the front gate, Jennifer recalls. She was waiting for Thomas. At one point, I asked her if she was sure he was coming, and she showed me a message from him. "I'll be there at 4:30. I'm nervous, but I'm ready." Then she asked me to stay with her when the moment of truth began, as she called it. Meanwhile, Daniel played the role of the gracious host. He approached each group of guests, kept up the conversation, and filled glasses. He spent a lot of time with Richard Palmer, his boss, and his wife. Daniel was extremely sociable, Richard recalls. He asked about my children, shared his plans for the future, and talked about how eager he was to become a father. I even joked that his wife's pregnancy was good for him. He laughed, but it seemed mechanical. At 4:28 a.m., according to surveillance camera footage, a taxi pulled up to the house. A tall man in a gray suit got out, looking very similar to Daniel, but with softer features and long hair tied back in a ponytail. It was Thomas Carter. He was holding a small gift bag with a blue ribbon. Melissa, who noticed him first, quickly approached the gate. They exchanged a few words, then she took him by the arm and led him across the yard. The guests, unaware of the tense relationship between the brothers, did not pay much attention to the newcomer. But Daniel, standing at the bar, froze with a glass in his hand when he saw his brother. His face turned white as chalk, says Emily Williams, who was standing next to him. He muttered something like, "Excuse me," and quickly walked toward the house. I thought he was feeling ill. A few minutes later, Daniel returned to the yard. His face was calm again, but his hands were visibly shaking, according to the observant Emily. At that moment, Melissa was introducing Thomas to some of the guests, standing on the opposite side of the yard from her husband. Thomas looked uncomfortable, frequently glancing around as if looking for a way out or afraid of something. At 4:45, Melissa asked for everyone's attention. Standing next to the birthday cake, she thanked everyone for coming and gave a short speech about the joy of impending motherhood and how she and Daniel had waited so long for this moment. Then she invited her husband to join her for the ceremonial cutting of the cake, which was supposed to reveal the sex of the baby. Daniel walked across the yard toward her as if in slow motion, Jennifer recalls. His face was frozen like a mask. Melissa smiled and held out the cake knife to him, but he didn't seem to see her. When Daniel stood next to his wife, she took his hand, and together they cut the cake. The bright blue filling elicited cheers and applause from the guests. "It's a boy! It's a boy!" At that moment, Melissa raised her hand, calling for silence, and uttered the words that would forever change the fate of the Carter family. "Yes, we are having a son. And today I want to introduce you to a special person who is very important to our family. Daniel's brother, Thomas Carter, has come to visit us from Seattle." According to the guests, a surprised whisper ran through the crowd. Many were unaware of Daniel's brother. "I could feel Daniel tense up next to me," Jennifer continues. His hand clenched into a fist, but his face remained still. Melissa gestured to Thomas, who approached them hesitantly. Now, standing side by side, the brothers looked strikingly similar, almost like twins, despite their different styles of clothing and hairstyles. "We are honored that Thomas was able to come today," Melissa continued, holding her husband's hand, "especially because Daniel and I have decided to name our son after him. Little Thomas Carter will be the link between our family's past and future." Silence fell. Guests who did not understand the full depth of the situation looked confused. Thomas stared at the ground, avoiding his brother's gaze. Daniel stood as if petrified. "It was a moment so tense that the air seemed to ring," recalls Richard Palmer. Even those who didn't know about the family drama sensed that something was wrong. Suddenly, Melissa took a small box out of her dress pocket and opened it, revealing a silver bracelet. "This is a gift for Thomas," she said, addressing all the guests, but looking directly at her husband. "A symbol of our respect and desire to correct old mistakes. It is engraved with the name Thomas and the date of the incident at the university. The date when everything went wrong, Daniel." Then she turned to Thomas and handed him the box. "We know the truth, Thomas. I found the medical report. You are not to blame for what happened, and Daniel must finally admit it." At that moment, Daniel turned away abruptly and quickly walked toward the house. Melissa apologized to the guests and followed him. Thomas remained standing by the cake with the open box in his hands, looking completely lost. What happened next was reconstructed from witness statements and surveillance camera footage. Daniel entered the house and headed straight for his study. Melissa caught up with him in the hallway. The camera captured their brief but tense conversation. "How could you do this in public?" Daniel's voice was quiet, but full of rage. "Make me look like a fool in front of everyone?" "I tried to talk to you alone many times," Melissa replied. "You refused to listen. Thomas has suffered all these years because of your pride. The report clearly shows that it was an accident. He didn't push you on purpose." "You don't understand." Daniel shook his head. "It's not about the fall. It's about what he did afterwards." With that, he went into his office and closed the door. Melissa stood there for a few seconds, then resolutely followed him. What happened in the office remains unknown. There were no cameras there. About 5 minutes later, the guests heard a scream. Jennifer, sensing something was wrong, ran into the house. Thomas and several other guests followed her. "I was the first to enter the office." Jennifer's voice trembles as she recalls that moment. Melissa was lying on the floor. A dark stain was spreading around her. The room smelled strongly of metal and blood. Daniel was standing by the window, his back to everyone, completely motionless. Thomas, seeing what was happening, rushed to his sister, trying to administer first aid. Richard Palmer immediately called an ambulance and the police. Daniel did not resist when 2 of the male guests pushed him away from the window and held him until the police arrived. Paramedics arrived 7 minutes later, but it was too late. Melissa Carter was pronounced dead at the scene from multiple stab wounds to the chest and abdomen. The child could not be saved either. The first police officer on the scene was Sergeant Anna. She secured the crime scene and began preliminary interviews with witnesses. The scene was chaotic, Sergeant recalls. The guests were in shock. Many of the women were crying. The suspect was sitting on the sofa in the living room, completely unresponsive. He didn't answer any questions, just stared at one spot. The murder weapon, a kitchen knife with an 8-inch blade, was lying on the floor of the study. 40 minutes later, Detective Sarah Rodriguez from the Homicide Division arrived on the scene. An experienced investigator with 15 years of experience, she immediately took control of the situation. "My first priority was to separate the witnesses and secure the evidence," Detective Rodriguez says. "In such emotionally charged scenes, people often unconsciously influence each other's testimony, creating a collective version of events that may differ from reality." The team of forensic experts got to work, methodically examining every inch of the crime scene. They photographed bloodstains, collected fingerprints, and took samples of fabric and fibers. The knife was new, with part of the store label still attached to the handle, notes Detective Rodriguez. That immediately caught my attention. Crimes of passion are usually committed with improvised weapons. A new knife suggested premeditation. Daniel Carter was arrested on suspicion of murder and taken to the police station. All this time, he remained silent, refusing to answer questions without a lawyer. Thomas Carter, unlike his brother, actively cooperated with the investigation. In his initial testimony, he confirmed that he had not communicated with his brother for about 10 years, since the incident at the university. According to Thomas, during a student party, an argument broke out, resulting in Daniel falling from a second-floor balcony, explains Detective Rodriguez. He suffered a serious spinal injury and was paralyzed below the waist for a long time. Thomas was accused of deliberately pushing his brother during the fight, and the case almost went to trial. Although Daniel subsequently recovered and the charges were dropped due to lack of evidence, the brothers never reconciled. Thomas's testimony coincided with a medical report that Melissa found. The document, discovered in her bag, contained the expert's conclusion that Daniel's injuries were the result of an accident, not an intentional push. It seems that Melissa sincerely believed that by revealing this truth, she would be able to help the brothers reconcile, says Detective Rodriguez. She did not take into account the depth of the resentment and possibly other aspects of their conflict that we do not yet know about. Jennifer Morris became a key witness in the investigation. She spoke about the growing tension between the couple, the investigation Melissa was conducting, and her plans for the party. Jennifer described Daniel as a controlling person, Detective Rodriguez notes. According to her, he reacted particularly painfully to any mention of his brother and categorically refused to discuss his past. Melissa's decision to name the child after Thomas and announce it publicly in front of her brother may have been the last straw. A search of the Carters' home yielded several more important clues. In Daniel's office, they found a recently written but unsent letter to his parents in which he accused Thomas of some kind of unforgivable betrayal and expressed shock that his wife had sided with the traitor. Forensic experts also found a receipt from the Food Line supermarket in the trunk of Daniel's car, dated the morning of the murder, for the purchase of a knife identical to the murder weapon. This finding significantly strengthened the theory that the crime was premeditated, says Detective Rodriguez. The purchase of a potential murder weapon a few hours before the crime indicates planning. By the evening of the first day of the investigation, most of the party guests had been interviewed. Their statements painted a fairly complete picture of what had happened, although many questions still remained unanswered. The past and present are intertwined in this case, Detective Rodriguez reflects. The secrets that Daniel had so carefully hidden came out at the most inopportune moment. But I feel like we still don't know the whole story. What exactly did Daniel mean when he said, "The thing is," what he did afterwards? What unforgivable betrayal did he mention in his letter to his parents? And why was the reaction to the decision to name the child after his brother so extreme? The answers to these questions would have to be found in the course of further investigation, which promised to reveal even darker secrets of the Carter family. The second day of the investigation into the murder of Melissa Carter began for Detective Sarah Rodriguez at 5 in the morning with a cup of strong coffee and a reanalysis of the evidence gathered. The wall in her office was already covered with photographs, notes, and a timeline of events. In every murder, there is a moment when the scattered facts begin to come together into a coherent picture, says Detective Rodriguez. In the Carter case, that moment came when I finally spoke to Daniel's parents. George and Margaret Carter flew in from Seattle on an early flight as soon as they heard about the tragedy. The elderly couple looked worn out by years of hidden grief and recent turmoil. "We knew that someday the past would come back," Margaret Carter said during an interview at the police station. Daniel was never able to let go of his pain and hatred. According to his parents, the conflict between the brothers did indeed begin with an accident at university when Daniel suffered a serious spinal injury after falling from a balcony. But the real reason for the rift was much deeper. Daniel was paralyzed from the waist down for almost a year, said George Carter. Thomas never left his side, tormented by guilt, even though all the witnesses confirmed that he did not push his brother intentionally. It was an accident during a stupid drunken quarrel. During Daniel's long recovery, his girlfriend, Allison Grant, whom he had been dating for 3 years and planned to marry after graduation, spent a lot of time with both brothers. She helped Thomas care for Daniel when their parents couldn't come. At some point, a connection developed between Thomas and Allison, Margaret continued, lowering her eyes. They struggled with their feelings, knowing how wrong it was. But when Daniel began to recover, and it became clear that he would be able to walk, they decided to tell him the truth. Thomas and Allison's confession was a terrible blow to Daniel. In his mind, his brother had not only stolen his girlfriend, but had taken advantage of his helplessness and betrayed him at the most vulnerable moment of his life. Daniel never forgave them, George said. He refused any financial help from us, moved to Portland, and completely cut off all ties with us. Thomas and Allison got married a year later, but their marriage couldn't withstand the weight of what had happened. They divorced 3 years later, but Daniel didn't care. For him, betrayal remained betrayal. This information allowed Detective Rodriguez to understand the depth of Daniel's trauma and his extreme reaction to Melissa's attempt to restore family ties. The next important step in the investigation was to examine the bracelet that Melissa had given Thomas at the party. Forensic experts discovered that, in addition to the name Thomas, the plate was engraved with the date 03/27/2015 and a short phrase, "Innocence proven. Time to forgive." That was the date of the accident at the university, explains Detective Rodriguez. Apparently, Melissa sincerely believed that by showing evidence of Thomas's innocence in the incident, she would be able to heal old wounds. She didn't understand that the real reason for Daniel's hatred lay much deeper. An analysis of Melissa's computer showed that 2 weeks before the murder, she found Allison Grant, now Allison Wilson, on social media and exchanged several messages with her. Allison confirmed the story about her relationship with Thomas and expressed deep regret for the pain she had caused Daniel. Melissa was an idealist, says Detective Rodriguez. She believed in redemption and forgiveness. In her mind, the birth of a child was supposed to be a new beginning for the whole family. By naming her son after her brother, she hoped to symbolically reconcile Daniel with the past. But instead, she unwittingly reopened his deepest wound. The interrogation of Thomas Carter brought even more clarity to the case. He confirmed that he had never planned a relationship with Allison and had sincerely tried to atone for his guilt toward his brother. Thomas looked like a man who had been carrying a heavy burden of guilt for 10 years, notes Detective Rodriguez. He said he agreed to come to the party at Melissa's insistence, who convinced him that Daniel was ready for reconciliation. He was unaware of her plan to announce the baby's name and was as shocked as the other guests. Key evidence of premeditation was found in a storage unit Daniel rented in an industrial area of Portland. There, investigators found a journal he had kept for the past 5 years. Entries from the last few weeks showed growing paranoia and anger. "Melissa is digging into my past," read one entry. "She doesn't understand that some wounds can't be healed. If she sides with Thomas, I will lose her like I lost Allison." The last entry, made on the morning of the murder, was particularly disturbing. "She chose him. My own son will bear the name of a traitor. History repeats itself, but this time I will not be helpless." These entries, along with witness testimony and physical evidence, painted a compelling picture of premeditated murder. On the 4th day of the investigation, the district attorney formally charged Daniel Carter with first-degree murder. During his entire time in custody, he uttered only one sentence: "She betrayed me, like everyone else." Daniel Carter's trial began 6 months later and attracted considerable media attention. The defense attempted to build a case based on temporary insanity and emotional breakdown caused by Melissa's actions. However, evidence of premeditation, the purchase of a knife on the morning of the murder, diary entries indicating growing aggression, convinced the jury to return a verdict of guilty without mitigating circumstances. Daniel Carter was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing, he remained impassive, as if what was happening did not concern him. "This case taught me a lot," Detective Rodriguez reflects a year later, standing in front of a memorial bench dedicated to Melissa in Portland City Park. "People can carry pain and hatred inside them for decades, like a time bomb." Daniel created a narrative of betrayal in his mind, in which anyone who tried to get close to his brother became an enemy. Thomas Carter returned to Seattle after the trial. According to Jennifer Morris, he regularly visits the graves of Melissa and her unborn son, leaving blue flowers, a symbol of what might have been. The tragedy of the Carter family reminds us of the danger of unresolved conflicts, says psychologist Dr. Elena Vasquez, who studied the case. Daniel was stuck in the moment of trauma, not allowing himself to move on. His hatred became a defining part of his identity, and when Melissa tried to destroy that construct, he saw it as an existential threat. In a maximum security cell in an Oregon correctional facility, Daniel Carter spent the first year of his imprisonment in almost complete silence. The only decoration in his cell was a childhood photograph of him and Thomas, smiling happily with their arms around each other's shoulders. Guards say that sometimes at night he talks to this photograph, although no one knows what he says.